Welcome to Leadership and Life Chat with your hosts, me, Becky Ames.
And me, Mark Curtis. In each episode, we'll be illustrating how success in leadership is inextricably linked with success in life.
Whether it's leadership in business, society, family or friends, we're all leaders.
Using our experiences and a range of expert guests, we'll share secrets to boosting your health, wealth and self.
So let's get on with the show.
Today, listeners, we have something slightly different for you. Instead of having a guest, we've got two guests today, and they've both been fantastic guests in the past. One is Alix Rübsaam, who's a specialist on AI and how it impacts on humanity. And the other guest was Alison Alexander, who is a specialist in all things metaverse. So we thought today we're going to have a roundtable discussion of how AI is going to impact on you as leaders and you as business leaders as well. It was a fascinating discussion. Becky and I learned huge amounts from this as well. So without further ado, we're going to go into the main recording, and I'm sure you're going to pull some value out for you and your businesses. So Alix and Alison, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming back again. We had two amazing episodes with you both, one on sort of AI and technology and one on the metaverse. And we thought, you know what, this stuff is now moving at such a fast pace. Let's get it all back together, two experts, and do it as a roundtable discussion, because I think there's so many areas that business leaders probably want to know, need to know, should know around what's going on with the metaverse, with AI. I think probably first roundtable discussion point, it's in the news all the while now. So ChatGPT, Bard. So what we're really talking about is large language models. They seem to be all the rage at the moment. Everyone's using it. In fact, I've used it myself. And the first thing I used it for was I said, can you write me a song in the style of Metallica, which covers environmental issues? And it came up with this kind of song, full song, which I thought, yeah, I could imagine that in the style of James Hetfield. And then I said, okay, can you write me the basic guitar riffs? Can you increase the complexity of the riff? Can you add a solo? And within 5 minutes, I could have ripped off Metallica. So that's interesting and also scary. And obviously we can apply that to business as well. So please, your thoughts around large language models, where we are, what's good, what's bad, anything that you think is relevant and interesting for business owners.
Well, first of all, I think the most interesting thing that's happening currently is like it's the party question, right? Is what was the first thing you did with a large language model? Because it's very sort of indicative of who the person is. It's very telling. Like, oh yeah, you wrote a Metallica song on environmental issues. Like that tells me a lot about you. So it's become this great icebreaker questions. Like, what's the first thing you've done with a large language model, which I love. I think the other thing that's really striking me about this is like we've known with exponentially developing technologies, right, that they move towards this path of democratization, meaning if you look at mobile telephony, right, it's become cheaper to buy a mobile phone. It's become quicker, it's become more powerful, and so you see this sort of move towards democratization in all of these exponentially developing technologies. What is very interesting about this with AI is that it used to be the case when we talked about the democratization of AI technologies, is that because data was cheaper, because storage was cheaper, because computing power was cheaper, the democratization angle on AI for a long time was everyone can build their own model, everyone can build their own AI, everyone can build their own automation. And now with large language models, there's a shift because suddenly it's not so much everyone can build their own model, but it's everyone can use this model that's been built by someone else. So it's sort of like a different productization of what AI in its many different sort of iterations, can do. A different kind of democratization, more comparable, I'd say, with sort of how we've seen mobile telephony. It's not like everyone's building their own phone. It's that everyone is able to buy a phone. So I think that is a very significant shift in how we think about AI as a product and AI as a sort of a way in which we use it for our business has therefore completely shifted, right? Because it's no longer like, oh, you can buy cheap data, you can build a model more cheap than you ever can, but actually you can take this off the shelf model, or this off the shelf product really is what it is, and use that yourself. So that has huge implications for how we use it and how we approach it as a technology. I think that's one of the things I've found most interesting.
So it's made AI accessible for the layperson like me, basically.
Accessible in a different way, right? I think there was an increase in access already with just the decreasing cost of data and the increase in computing power. And this is, you get to decide less about the just like you don't get to decide sort of what your mobile phone looks like exactly, up to a point. Of course, you can decide what apps you put on it. Even though the actual costs of building a phone have also decreased, right? If you were to draw that parallel fully. But then now, yes, there's a different kind of access, again, for more people than ever before. And that just takes a different approach, right? As how we've approached AI before.
And if I jump in, firstly, I love Alex's question, which I'm going to use at every party I go to from now on. What did you use ChatGPT for, or any like large language model? So not just that one, but what was the first thing you did? And then you can kind of, or you can try and guess it about who did it. And I mean, and in a sense, if we bring it to business, and I just do that, the bit of, if you're in a team meeting, why didn't you get everyone to say, what did they first use it for? Even if you're not allowed to use it in work, because some companies aren't allowing people to use it, what did you first use it for at home? So firstly, it's a great team building exercise. You get to know a bit more about each other.
Yeah.
But also, you'll get to find out who in the room is just using it generally, which again, I think it does come back to what I have always said around businesses. You can actually look inwards to get your expertise around all of this developing technology, because whilst you might be the leader, if you are not comfortable or a digital native, you are likely to have a workforce that is digitally native. So first you find out who you've got in your workforce. So I think that's always helpful. So I love that game. Whoever made it up, it's a brilliant one. And I think everyone should use it you should use it on all of your podcasts from now on. And if you actually ask ChatGPT particularly, what was the first thing everybody used it for? You'll be glad to see the answer you get is, we don't track individual interactions, so we can't answer that question. But what we can tell you is that most people use it for general conversation. That's what they most used it for. Yeah, so they didn't make songs for Metallica to rip them off, but they did use it to just ask a question. Yeah, but I also think the point that you made, Mark, that I think that we should make sure that we focus on is what you did was prompt engineering. Because you said you asked it to write you a song, and then you went back and you asked it to add another element and then another element. And that is about helping the nation understand prompt engine. Like, how do you prompt ChatGPT? How do you get it to give you the answer you want? Yeah, at the moment, we're all used to doing searches, whether it's on any of the Google, Edge, anything. But actually, how do we use that? And again, that's a skill that I think all employers need to be thinking. How do they help their staff do that? Because that will come to lots of the conversations we have about like diversity, inclusion, ethics, and all of those things.
I think we've got our next question for Alix and Alison, because they need to answer what the first thing was. I'm going to have to put my hands up and say I did actually lie. It's not the first thing I did. The first thing I did was actually say, tell me about Mark Curtis accounting in the UK. So I tried to keep that one quiet.
Oh my God.
And it basically said,
your ego is out of control.
Don't know who he is. I'm not a directory or something. So yeah, who do you think you are? I'm nobody. I realise now.
Producer Lizzie in the background rolling her eyes.
All of us roll our eyes, Lizzie.
Yes.
But you could have guessed that's what he would have done.
So Alison and Alix, I'd love if you're prepared to tell us what the first things you did, and then we'll go on. We'll bring it back to business again after that.
I think the first thing I did, and I actually use Claude by Anthropic a lot, because it has the ability to sort of pass through more material than ChatGPT currently. It's always one of those things where you claim something on a podcast like this, and in 2 weeks, like the whole landscape has changed again. But at the moment when I was doing this, I was using Claude. I had some of my own research just for writing, and I was stuck and I felt disconnected. So I lost sort of the overarching plot of like, wait, how do these two things go together again? And so I loaded them both up I worked with it to help me figure out sort of like where all the connections were between these two sort of what at the moment felt like disparate pieces of my own research that I couldn't remember how I was supposed to bring them together. So basically like a research assistant.
That is really amazing, isn't it? And I think I work with someone and they're our digital AI specialist on our learning hub, and literally sometimes I watch him doing the prompting, and exactly what you just said. It's like, actually, you can write, can we co-produce a piece of work? And the next answer is, well, what do you want to co-produce it about? And okay, I'd like to do this. So you can even work like that. And so that's brilliant to like hear that example, Alex, of like that's how you used it, because it reminds me very much of seeing Jamie do that. And actually it then does become a part of you, where everyone, I think, gets really concerned if you use models. Actually, it's no longer your stuff. But actually, if you use those as the prompts, you actually do say, and I think that's really important for younger people as they're learning it, so that they don't think, oh, it's just someone else's work. It's still an element of them that they're putting in that is asking for some help, especially when you're blocked. Because I used it, the first time I used it was to rewrite a speech. And I did that because I feel sometimes I use language that's quite simple. I'm going to say this, yeah. And I feel that sometimes when people are looking for a speaker, they want more sophisticated language. So I literally wrote my speech and then I put it I did use ChatGPT. I used GPT-4. I put it in there and asked it to rewrite this. And I asked it to do certain like prompts around the language and the audience and all of that. And actually it rewrote it in a different way. Now, the question is it still me then when you use it? But one of the things I think that that's really helpful for is especially disadvantaged groups who will use words or language that might not often be what other people are expecting to hear. And I think they can really use it to turn their language around. And then, yes, when you do that many times, does that start to become your language too? It might do. But actually, it gives you an opportunity. So I think it's really helpful for that as well.
Yeah,
But
I love that.
yeah,
I love that example. I think the most powerful use of any sort of like generative AI is as an extension of your own expertise, right? So whatever you're already doing, like very basic stuff, it doesn't get very interesting, right? But as long as it's done in tandem with whatever your expertise is, or in my case, it was just querying like large pieces of text and finding what was there, or working towards sort of building out or communicating what you already have in terms of expertise, right? Then it becomes interesting.
I recently used it and just like that was a really good example because I used it for a really boring activity. It was going to be a really long activity. It would have been like it would have literally been a long time for me to do it. Yeah, and it was to write learning objectives for a courses. Yeah, so we do learning, and we've eventually decided to accredit our learning, but all of our contributors never wrote learning objectives and purposes in one systematic way. So literally, when you're accrediting, it was like a 60-hour course that I'm doing. It's actually, how do I go back and get that consistency? And now I can give those guidance going forward to contributors. I always want a purpose that's 50 words long, that's in line with a level 4 learner, that does all of this. But actually, being able to do that, first I've got huge consistency. And then when you have like 90 pieces of learning, you can then say, how do all of these combined, a bit like what Alix did, make this overall learn? How does it combine? How does it link? And I found that so useful. If I'd had to do that exercise, we are talking about a lot of hours. It took me a lot of hours anyway. It's not just a simple write this in because you've got to write each course in, but it still was much better. And I feel it was much more systematic.
Yeah.
I think the big thing I'm taking from this part of the conversation for leaders, business owners, is almost think about it as having and I love the phrase you used, Alex, which is research assistant. these large language models are your research assistants. So if you've got some research to do, it will scour the research within seconds for you. I mean, so I think probably at the moment, large language models are not doing anything that we can't do as humans. We are not, and we'll come on to AGI. So we're talking just AI at the moment, very narrow processing. They're just doing what a human can do, but in a much shorter space of time, because everything is out there, isn't it? Pretty much, you could find it yourself. It could take you days to do it.
Yeah, you know this about me, but I always bristle at this distinction of what humans can do and what AI can do. And it's like, there is such a, like, I can't do that. I can't read that much and then come up with answers and do it again 5 minutes later. I can't do that. I absolutely cannot do that. That AI absolutely can do something that I can't do, much like an airplane can do things that I can't do. I think this distinction of, like, there's some sort of black and white border between this is what humans can do and now AI can do what humans can do. It absolutely can do things I can't do. Just like a calculator can do things I can't do. And so I think there's a bit of an artificiality to that distinction that we somehow like, that we sort of, that provides us with a sense of comfort or uniqueness or whatever. But I also, that's on the one end. And the other thing, I think it also mystifies or has a risk of mystifying artificial intelligence, and especially around the discussion of sort of AGI later on. I just don't really believe in that distinction, much like I don't really believe in the notion of AGI, because I think it one demarcates something that doesn't sort of adhere to those kinds of borders, and two, it sort of it mystifies, I should say, not demystifies, it mystifies something that isn't inherently necessarily helped, nor are we helped by that mystification.
I think that's a really good point, because actually what I'm doing, I'm scared, aren't I? I'm scared of AI. So the fact that I have to justify it in as much as, hey, I could do this. It might take me 10 years to do the research that it's done in 5 seconds. I could still do it, because if I can't, then I feel out of control. As a human being, if there's something which can do something which I don't understand and it's doing it better or differently and I can't do it, that's quite a sobering position as a human being. When it comes to, I'm not a plane. I get I can't fly, but this is just words on a screen. You know, I can do that, but suddenly if I can't, then it challenges who I am as a human being.
Yeah, but I think that's more to do with how we determine who we are as human beings than it has to do with what an AI can or cannot do. Like in our current sort of scientific paradigm, we have the notion of processing information has high prestige, right? And there's many things that humans do that we don't currently value as much, but that doesn't mean that we're not experts in them. When it comes, just to give you some random examples, but you know, human beings are like, have you ever seen that? There's like this meme of like how human beings are basically space orcs, because we have all of these, like the orcs of space of like the Lord of the Rings. Oh, this is such a weird, I'll find it, I'll send it to you. But basically saying human beings have all these like insane things that we're weirdly good at, such as repairing broken bones with our bodies, which, like, if you compare it to if a horse breaks its ankle, it's done. But humans aren't. And there's all these other things that we're able to do, both physically, mentally, cognitively, that we just don't currently have that much of a hyper focus on. If you look sort of like at the history of, you know, science and research, then we are still in this very much sort of rather restrictive paradigm and reductionist paradigm that we've sort of built around us in the Enlightenment, that values more than anything deductive thinking, as well as there's a huge bias on verbal representation of thought. And so within that paradigm, of course, if we value ourselves in that way, if we think of ourselves predominantly as information processing entities, and there's another, then it also makes sense that we start trying to make other information processing entities, because that's a thing we care a lot about. And then if that thing becomes more sort of able at information processing than we are, then it makes sense that we're feeling threatened, I think. But I do think that that is a giant sort of reduction of what human cognition, let alone human existence, fully represents.
And humans have we always show that fear factor, don't we? That in newness, really.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, even everyone listening here, when they've been in a change process in their companies, will be. It's making sure that we understand that as humans we have that fear. So if we're told we're going to be a restructure and we have that kind of fear, and then we're told, look, here is. I mean, I want to say what you said earlier, Alex, about a calculator. How many accountants got worried about a calculator coming and how that was going to impact on people's profession, or was that going to delete roles that existed? Yeah, so we always have this, and I think again that's something that I think employers should always be talking aloud about, because I think so much of when you're bringing in newness or when new things are appearing, our role as leaders is to help, even if we're scared by it, and sometimes we won't know the answers and we're scared. Our role is to help everyone else understand it or how they're to talk about it. And I think that's a really important thing, to get people to keep talking about it. What are examples in the past that they can see? And then to be having that wider discussion. Okay, so this is what we as humans will do and are doing, and this is what the machines are doing for us, and this is how that's going to grow, and this is how we are going to evolve. Because that's what we need to get ourselves into thinking, isn't it? We're going to evolve into what we do and how we co-produce things with the machines.
I love that parallel. I think you make such an important point, because it truly is about leadership and governance, right? It is deciding how we make space for retraining, and that's both at a business level, at a governance level. If you think about the Industrial Revolution, right? We know the research shows that it takes a generation of 2 to 3 generations to really recover from the disenfranchisement of not having proper policies, social structures in place to cushion such a revolution, right? And so to be able to say, okay, we know we're at Industry 4.0, we know this is coming, we can look to the past and we can see what the leadership and governing decisions are that need to be made in order to ensure that it is in fact a transition and not just a leaving behind of a large group of people.
Yep.
But I love that parallel exactly of this newness that
Yep.
you know, we do have an inherent sort of or an intrinsic fear response to.
Yeah. And it's so important to not wait to think the government are going to tell us how to do it. Yeah. If you are there in business and you are thinking, well, I need to wait for those policies to come out, which will tell us how we're going to wait. Yeah. It's going to take a while. Anything at that level does. So the most important thing is, rather than close, because I've heard loads of companies who say, don't use AI, don't bring it into here, we're not having it. It's like, actually, we need to have a really different approach to it. We need to say, yes, we do want all of that legislation, regulation that will come and will catch up. But whilst that is being evolved, we know that everyone's going to be playing with it and using it. And that could be to their business advantage. And therefore, if we don't, it will be to our business disadvantage. So actually, how do we do that safely? And therefore, with everyone's awareness, so that you don't have the one marketing person in the corner using it and doing great jobs, and then everyone else is like, well, we're not allowed to touch it. How do you, as a company, every company needs to look at what is going to be our current stance on this. And you don't have to investigate the whole thing, but you just need to have an overall statement so everybody in the workforce feels safe. Okay, it is okay to use it as long as I'm clear when I'm using it, or I can't use it. And I think that's a really important thing for people to do. And then to take on the responsibility of how are we going to retrain our workforce.
Yeah. And that's such an important point, Alison, because I know we've just brought policies within our business for use of large language models. And some of that is also driven by liability risk. So when we look at our professional indemnity insurance renewal, and we were talking to our brokers, and this will be the same for any business, I suspect, with their insurance, which is relevant to their sector and their industry, if we've got to record usage of it. So we have to keep a log of how we're using it as well. Otherwise, we invalidate. So if something happens and we can't prove that it wasn't generated by whatever model it may have been, potentially our professional indemnity insurance won't kick in if something happened off the back of it. So it goes. So I think you're right. It's like everything else, isn't it? This is going to be a growing and morphing position, which is, it was a bit Wild West. Everyone was just kind of typing stuff in and going for things, and then suddenly people realize that, hang on a minute, you can't put sensitive data into most of these models at the moment because it's not secure. So you've got to do it anonymously. So you've got to have some policy and protection for your teams around that. Then you have to look at how does it impact on your insurance. So what systems do you need in place to be able to manage and monitor the use of it? So this is already evolving quite quickly in the business environment. If it's evolving this quickly in accountancy, we're usually quite slow in the accountancy profession to move, but that's where we've got to already within our sphere, and other spheres would have moved more quickly as well. So I think, another area that business owners should really think about, as you were saying there, both of you actually, is how do you bring this into your business in a controlled, safe way, rather than it just being complete Wild West. And we need a managed process. So if you're not using it at the moment, look at it, because it could save you a lot of time and energy and effort as a business. And if you are then going to use it, try and come up with some process and system, just so you've got some boundaries of how you're going to operate as well.
It's a fine balance, isn't it? And we've seen that in our business. You want to allow people to use it and to find all the good bits, but you don't want them to run with it so fast that, it's putting us at risk ultimately. So it's that fine balance, isn't it? And some people then will just go, oh, well, that's too hard, I'm not even going to go near it. So it's about slowly encouraging them to give it a go. There are some boundaries, but just give it a go. Because I don't want them putting it in the it's too hard box over there, because we'll miss out on some really good stuff.
That's so important, this is definitely one of those things that people will put in that too hard box, because it's tech and if you're a non-tech native, this is definitely one of those things that you put over there. And if you do that, then everyone in your business will be using it in some way, shape. So even if it's doing that, and the most important thing is, when you're not at work, go play with every single element of it, and see and learn and constantly enable yourself to understand what it can do. That's really important.
And I've just thought of I've seen a really good example of someone in our business using it, and I've seen a really bad example of someone in our business using it. I'm going to start with the bad example, and I will not mention their name, so I want to protect the not so innocent in this situation. So someone was asked to come up with a marketing plan for their area of the business, and what got submitted, they'd left ChatGPT at the top of it. So they'd literally typed in, can you come up with a marketing plan for XXX, the area that they're working in? And they literally submitted it and said, here's our marketing plan. And that was like, A, it's very lazy. B, it wasn't tailored at all. So it was just so generic. And they didn't really know how to use ChatGPT either, because they hadn't then gone to interrogate and refine and get into further detail by posing second and third and fourth level questions. So that was a really bad example. So I would say for anyone out there, don't do that. The good example.
You know what I do like about that is I think it's good to be transparent about using it. Right?
Yeah, agreed.
So even though that, yes, there should have been follow-up questions, there should have been refinement, to be transparent, maybe not intentionally, but I like when people are intentionally transparent, sharing their conversations, showing like, this is what they came up with, this is the part that I did, because that's also helping. That's also one, being transparent about where your stuff comes from, and two, also helping others to do that well. So I get that it's a bad example, but it's not all bad for me.
No, and I think the bit it misses, and this probably goes back to our first when you were a guest previously, Alex, is human in the loop. In that situation, it was almost like human in the loop was missing.
Human in the loop.
Yeah, so you don't just let the tech run wild. At some point, you have a human who gets there's human intervention still. And in that example, the person had just lazily typed it into ChatGPT and gone, data dump, here you go, here's our marketing plan. So they hadn't intervened in the tech. So the tech did what it did. They just didn't intervene to get more value and quality out of it. So that, I think that's probably where I'm coming from the bad example. But you're right. They showed initiative. They'd done something with it, but they could and should probably should have gone a bit further. I think a great example that I did see was what one of our team was working on Power BI dashboards, and they needed to put a bit of coding into the dashboard, and they're not a coder, they're not skilled at coding, so they had a little stab at it, and then they put that into ChatGPT to get the correct coding to go back into the Power BI dashboard. And I just thought that is absolutely fantastic, because that is proper human in the loop. They knew what they were looking to achieve. They used the tech to do the bit that they just couldn't do because they didn't have the knowledge set to do it, and it gave them the right answer, and they put it in and it worked. So I thought that was a really good example of using the tech to your advantage.
It's about enhancing, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say, and I've done that exactly, because I am not a coder. I'm a people person. That's where I come from. And I was trying to set up an automation so that I could write on Substack, and then from there it would directly take it to LinkedIn and then to Twitter, so that I didn't have to post on all these different places. And that was because when you post on LinkedIn, it just gets lost in the end. And somebody said to me, keep all your stuff in a library. So I now post on Substack, and then directly it automates. But when it was doing that, one of the bits that it was doing is it wouldn't take the image. And then when you want to do it also to Twitter, you needed it to take a certain line. And every time I tried to do this in Zapier with a bit of help, I have to say with a bit of help, I couldn't do it. But we did exactly that. We went to GPT-4 and we said, this is what we're doing. It keeps bringing over the wrong sentence. What is it that we're doing wrong? Or can you write me code to exclude? And that's the bit. When you do on Substack, it says subscribe now. It has a little box that appears, and you want to eliminate that. And therefore, we had to write code to get it to do that. But I have no idea how to write code. So I went in, asked it to do it. It wrote the code, put it in. I tested it and it didn't work because it was actually capitalized. So then you have to learn to go back and say, make it like it doesn't matter about capitalization. And it did it. So I just thought, I just think that's phenomenal, really. And then I looked like a coding expert, and I didn't even do anything.
Alison, how would you know that the fact it was capitalised was the bit that wasn't working?
Oh, because all I was doing was looking, and the code it had got like subscribe now, and it was S and N was capital. And then when when I was doing it, it didn't have that, and they said looking at it, that was the only other thing to do, to try it without. Yeah. And so we just said, this isn't working. Is it because it's like capitalized or that? And then it gives you another code. And so try it again.
It's just mad.
Excellent. So we've started off this roundtable discussion on large language models, and it's morphed into little tentacles have gone out into slightly different areas, but largely we've kept a topic, which is great. And we've come up with some good points for leaders and business owners already on what we can do. So Alix, where would you like it to go now? Which, spinning off here, where do you think would be an interesting place to go?
Well, I think there's, on the human in the loop perspective, right? Of course, with this too, like we talked about in the beginning, there's a difference in how you approach it. Like, are you building your own model? And then, you have a human in the loop within that model who looks at what's happening. Is that what we intended to happen? Is that what we need the model to do? If you build your own AI, if you build your own automation and your own model. Now that we're using someone else's product, right? Be it OpenAI, be it Anthropic, be it whichever, you don't get to be in that loop, right? So you don't get a seat at the table of how that AI should work, what it should optimize for, etc. So this also takes a different approach, and I think this is a significant shift that we see as well. There was this I don't know if any of you watched it earlier this year, at the beginning of this year. Actually, it started end of last year and it lasted for 2 full months. there was this, I think it was GPT-3 at the time. GPT-3 and DALL-E generated non-stop Seinfeld episodes. Did any of you see this? It was bizarre and it was just glorious. So it was non-stop. It was trained on Seinfeld videos and scripts. I think just scripts. But it also had like the guitar riffs, and it learned also when to do like an audience laugh, like, you know, the laugh track on like sitcoms. But it wasn't great. So sometimes the audience would laugh at something that wasn't funny, and it just became this whole, like, it was quite pixelated, the look of it, and it was just non-stop. And then you'd hear this like weird Seinfeld-esque guitar riff in the middle of things, all out of place. They kept using the microwave in the apartment. They never left the apartment, actually. And it was just scenes in the apartment, and then the character that was sort of based on Jerry Seinfeld doing some of his stand-up stuff. For 2 straight months, this ran because, and this to me, okay, but this is like the ultimate example of something being like, hey, we can consider that technology democratized because it's cheap enough to do something with that no one would spend like any money on, making non-stop Seinfeld episodes that run for 2 months straight. So you can see, like, okay, we're at that point where it's cheap enough to use for anything you wanted to use. It's cheap enough to experiment with. It's cheap enough to do these things with. So this was going on. It was on Twitch. I watched for hours. It was just mesmerizing. And then early February, in one of the I have a point to this story. I'm not just pitching like this. In early February, what happened was, in one of the bits that the Jerry Seinfeld character was doing on like his stand-up stuff, he made transphobic jokes. And so the Twitch content moderation automation, which is also an algorithm, immediately flagged the stream. It got pulled down and it got a ban for 2 weeks. Now, in and of itself, that is, of course, an indication of biases that are present in the training data set and blah, blah, blah. And we can go into that. We've talked a lot about that at previous, like, that's a prime example of something being labeled funny that shouldn't have been labeled funny. And that's due to biases present in the data set. So that's there. But what was super interesting is how the people, and I forget their names, but the people who had made this stream gave some insights into what they thought was going on as to why this wouldn't happen, which is they had an additional filter, or they thought they had. It turns out that filter was turned off. An additional filter on top of what was generated by this AI that they were using, which is DALL-E and specifically GPT-3. I think it was GPT-3. So they had built something on top of that. They were running one from OpenAI themselves, and then they later on had one of their own, which they thought was turned on, but it turned out that was turned off. And that's how this joke made it through those additional filters. Now, the reason why that's interesting is because it gives us insights into what some of the next steps are in how we maintain our own sort of like applications and ensure that those are aligned with what we're trying to do, right? Once we're in this space where we are using other people's AI products, specifically generative AI, where we don't get to say what the parameters, what the optimizations are, what the goals of this AI are. And so there's a secondary layer where, as a user, right, if you're using this for your business, you need to ensure that whatever it's generating is then refiltered through whatever whatever you're optimizing for, whatever you're trying to align it towards. Within this example, and the way that they went about showing this, they were like, immediately they came out like, this is not what we intended to do. We thought this filter was on. That joke should never have made it through our additional filter. And so that gave us a lot of insights into what the future for businesses when using these technologies is going to be, that we see, well, there's additional work that we need to do, which again requires a human in the loop. And there's these models built on top of models that you might get from somewhere else, that you can use to ensure that whatever you're using these technologies for is aligned with what you're trying to get them to do. So I think that was a very interesting moment to see how the role of generative AI, right, is really shifting. How, especially for like small and medium businesses, or in this case, a group of people who wanted to make non-stop Seinfeld episodes, right? how we have to work with these models to ensure that they sort of do what we want them to do and what it takes to get that to do that.
It's about taking responsibility, isn't it?
It
You
is.
can't absolve yourself of responsibility.
Yeah.
And I guess if I'm being really simplistic about it, Mark, in our business, that would be if someone wrote a blog using ChatGPT and then we get a person who is technically expert in that area to review it.
Yeah.
That would be our filter currently.
Exactly.
Because we've got to take responsibility for what we're putting out there effectively.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that can be automated or a human, right? But it needs a sort of perspective.
Yeah, and we've got the sort of, is it technically right, if you like, but then there's also is it morally right? And I think that's where it perhaps gets really difficult, isn't it? Because I think I can't remember the experiment, but there's the thought experiment around the runaway trolley car, isn't there? Which all of the psychologists have always used, and the philosophers have used as well. Which is, I don't know, it's something like you've got a runaway trolley car and there's 6 kids standing on the rail line and it's going to hit them. There's 3 people in the trolley car. You have the ability to hit the handle which diverts the car away, so only the 3 people die rather than the 6 kids on the rail line, or whatever the example is. It's not quite that, but it's that. So what is the right moral judgment for that decision? And then you lay it with the next thing, which is actually there's a person on that trolley cart who is going to in 5 years' time cure cancer. So do you give the 6 lives to say, and you can keep adding moral dilemmas onto this. And at the end of the day, even if we get to AGI, how it's never going to deal with moral dilemmas because it's still going to have to make judgment calls in the same way as we do as humans. So we've got, is it technically right? Is it morally right? And is it morally right will depend on so many different factors and each individual, because we've all got different moral compasses, haven't we? So in some ways, you're never going to end up, I can't see we can ever end up with a definitive position coming out of any technology, because we don't end up with a definitive position coming out of any human being anyway.
No, but we do have, I mean, in a sense, because we haven't been able to get to a single moral compass or a single kind of approach to what's right or wrong. That's why we all have different regulations and legislations that say, actually, you need to take these things into account, don't you? I mean, that's why we have that, because we haven't been able to, as humans, kind of regulate ourselves so that we are literally working morally in a way that doesn't disadvantage different groups, doesn't put some people in different positions than others. So because of that, we have an array of legislation that tells us how we need to do things to get it right. And then suddenly we are talking as if we're saying this machine isn't going to get it right. And that's really terrible. One sec, we haven't got it right, and we've had to produce legislation to help us. So it's the same about how we are going to help the machine learn that. I mean, I heard of a kind of public sector area that was saying, right, we can't use this at all because it has so many issues around bias, and some of my question is, well, how do we help it not be biased? If you stop engaging with it, then it's only going to have actually those people who are engaging with it, they're going to have their bias. We need to increase the usage.
And if we were going to base everything on bias, then we wouldn't use human beings for anything either, would we? We are, whether we like it or not. I mean, what is it? There are over 200 cognitive biases, which we do without even realizing we're doing most of the time. So it's a little bit kettle calling the pot black, or whatever the phrase is, for us to start saying, actually, this tech could be biased, when we are inherently biased ourselves.
I think there's two points to make in respect to that. One, Becky already made, right, is that it's about taking responsibility. I think a really important misunderstanding that I see occur a lot is that there is such a thing as an unbiased algorithm, right? And I know we talked about this, I think, last time, is like any algorithm has a bias. If you're developing like a fruit sorter that's using optic lenses to detect apples, then it has a bias for apples. And that's not a problematic bias. That's just the way that the algorithm works. That's the way that it detects. And so in order to detect anything, which is ultimately what a lot of these algorithms do, is just detect and predict, it needs to have biases, but it comes to taking responsibility and ownership of these are the biases that it's supposed to have, and I, as the owner of this product, right, stand behind the design decisions, the biases that it has, because I have done the work of seeing if with these specific biases there might be downstream unintended consequences that I have taken the work of actually seeing if those would occur. And if they do, I am the one who takes responsibility for that, and I'm the one who's responsible for addressing and correcting that. So that's one. The other thing that I do think is a very important distinction in this space is that humans are biased, but humans are a lot more flexible than computational systems, right? We are much better at self-correcting than automations are. And we do that ourselves. We seek that out ourselves. And that's something that when you train a model in a specific way, we get back to this notion of having a human in the loop. When you train a model in a specific way, it will just do that forever. Unless you have a human that decides to build that system in a way that it takes in new data. In San Francisco, you've got all these self-driving cars now, right? Which are very exciting. I was in one recently, and it's terrifying for the first 5 minutes because you're in traffic, and then it gets scarily boring soon, very quick. But then, okay, so if you take a self-driving car that's trained in San Francisco and you plop it into New Delhi or a traffic situation where there's a lot of small two-wheel motorized vehicles, for example, we all know, okay, that needs some retraining. And that really is all that a human in the loop is, right? You wouldn't plop that into that car that's been trained there somewhere else. And so you require that sort of human in the loop. The reason for that is because humans have that contextual awareness to be able to say, okay, we need some additional training. And that's what you don't get. So there's a trade-off in rigidity versus flexibility that humans do have, right? And so that's where, when it comes to the bias question, is one is that responsibility, and two is the ability to ensure that there's stopgaps in place that can ensure that those biases are potentially checked, or that they're the ones you want, and that there's the ability to sort of update the model when new information becomes relevant or needed.
Is this why AGI, so artificial general intelligence, is almost seen as the holy grail for these the companies working on it? Because suddenly it goes from being narrow AI, where it just becomes task oriented, to actually starts to replicate some of that self-awareness and that learning ability?
I think we are very far off from understanding what human cognition is, and it feels reductive to me to say we're getting closer to that when we don't even know what that is. I think when it comes to human ability to process information, which is a very narrow task, AIs are already better than humans, right? To do that within the context of full embodied human cognition, I don't think we have any idea. Well, we have some ideas, but we don't have a full scope of what exactly human consciousness, human embodied cognition is. And so to make any assessment about how far or close we are from that seems silly to me, honestly. I think that comes back to having a very narrow idea of what we think it means to be human, which is completely boxed in by our current paradigmatic thinking about information processing as somehow the sort of highest possible thing we could possibly achieve. And then saying, yeah, we're really close to being able to do that, but completely not paying enough attention to all the other things that humans are and do.
And sometimes I wonder if our ability to have the use of AI at our fingertips will make that harder for us to understand, because as I gave you the example, I could make it look like I could do coding. So, but I actually couldn't. I could understand it a bit, but in a sense, I'm not really. And so actually what we're at danger is of people thinking, well, okay, now we have AI and it can do all these things for us. Well, then it's going to be able to jump to this next stage and do all of that because look, it helped me do all these things. And that is the part of, we don't understand humans. If we understood humans, we would have been able to eliminate bias, discriminate. We would have been able to read, or lots of those things that we've been talking about now. I mean, but even now, as we are automating things, we still are actually in like 2023. I mean, we are still producing automations that are biased towards certain groups. And therefore, it is about, we don't have that comprehension of the human cognition, as Alex has been saying. And there is a bigger danger that we will all jump from, well, we've got AI, so we can just go straight to AGI and we can have that because that's just a bunch of tasks all put together. If we can say we're doing one and now we're going to do all of them.
It's such a good point. And I think even to further that is we also tend to then further define ourselves and reduce ourselves because it's what our technologies are doing, right? I don't know if you've ever interacted with, I was at a friend's house in the US and they have an, what is she called? Alexa. And she doesn't pick up, well, I'm sure you can put the settings as such, but this was in an American house. So she didn't pick up my accent and I had to like fake an American accent in order to get her to do something. And I thought that was so sort of indicative of how we sometimes change how we do things in order for the technology to understand us. And so I think we're at risk of further reducing what we are as humans in order to fit into a sort of legible format for our technologies. What I would hope what we're doing is to use these technologies to do, like, have the AI do the information processing, have us do the other things, rather than us boxing ourselves into a smaller way so that we're sort of passable or legible by our technologies, which I find myself doing. You know, you have like kind of Google, when you're Googling something, you're talking, you're typing, you're, as well as actually when you're talking to a ChatGPT or whatever, there's a specific way of talking to it that you kind of adopt because you know that's what's getting you the results, which is not, for me, the way I normally speak, to be clear. I also find myself much more polite to it, weirdly. But my point is that what if there's a point where we start changing how we behave and how we think and how we do things so that it fits our technologies, when what I would love to see is quite the opposite, right? Is to have like, okay, the information processing is for the computers, the other stuff that we've kind of neglected for a couple of 100 years, maybe we go focus on those things.
That's it. We need to be saying it's not good enough yet. It's not good enough that it will only understand that accent. It's not good enough that it will only do this. And we need to constantly, we need to celebrate what it can add, and we need to talk about its limitations. And therefore, so that those who are building and are around that table are actually thinking, yes, this is what we need to be. So when we're talking about regulation, for me, it's saying this is what we need to be talking to the kind of creators of AI. These are the bits that we need to be saying, you need to be thinking about this, not producing us something phenomenal that can do algebra in like a second and can help everyone. Actually, how is it helping everybody? How is it understanding everybody? We don't want 7.5 billion people to be exactly the same. We have 7.5 billion unique individuals, and we need AI to be able to work with those.
I was just going to say, Alex, the point you were saying there about humans almost taking themselves down to the lowest common denominator, maybe that is part of the issue, isn't it? Which is if you meet most people in the Western world or the global North, or whichever way you want to look at it, when people introduce themselves, 99% of people introduce themselves about what they do. So they identify with, and we've talked about this so many times on the podcast over the last few years, people identify with what they do, not who they are. And that is part of the reductionist problem, isn't it? I suspect, which is if people are saying, well, actually, hi, I'm Mark and I'm an accountant, and that's the first thing I tell you about myself, that means my identity, the way I identify with myself, is being an accountant. So therefore, if AI can do my job for me, that is really scary, because it doesn't just take my income stream, it takes my identity as a human being away as well. So, and we almost need to get people to start identifying with who they are, not what they are. And suddenly then the tech becomes less intimidating, because you come back to, I mean, I was listening to Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, on a podcast, and he's very much pushing for sort of I can't remember the term he uses, but is it general income, where a universal income? Because I think probably he sees that, you know, AI and AGI, if we get there, will change the job market. Therefore, I guess he's looking at it going, well, actually, if we can bring in some universal, you know, you all get a set amount of money from the government, you don't have to feel threatened about your jobs anymore. But I think it misses the point then, doesn't it? Which is, it still threatens people's identity.
Well, yeah, it's funny because you just did it in talking about him. You were like, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, like the identifier was his job. I think the risk is that, and this goes to a lot of, well, actually it goes beyond AI as well, is that just as a way of thinking, critical thinking, if you will, there's a point at which a heuristic, right, or anything we use, be it a metaphor, be it a specific turn of phrase that we use to describe something, is at risk of becoming the totality of the thing it's actually meant to just refer to. I think that's, I mean, I'm not a life coach or anything, but I do think absolutely when it comes to how we relate, a lot of us relate to our jobs, that's a risk we have, right? It's a risk that we confuse the totality of what we are with just that part of the identity. I don't think that's necessarily a tech problem or an AI specific problem, as much as
it's our characteristics rather than what we do. But I do want to come back to Sam Altman, because I think that that's a whole discussion, probably not for just like a few moments. But Becky, I know you were going to say something about being devil's advocate. So I don't know if you still wanted to say that.
Well, so from my simplistic point of view, we see AI as, or some people see it as a threat, and it's going to take all the jobs away, and what are we going to do? And you said, Alison, we need the people around the table to be listening and saying, well, Alexa needs to be able to identify different accents without Alex having to adopt one. But why do we need tech to keep advancing like that if it's sure? For my simple mind, there's a place for the tech, and then there's a place for what we do with the tech and what we bring to the party, and the human aspect and the human element. And if the tech keeps advancing on that bit, because it's more and more capable of understanding different accents and everything, then that to me is the threat of, could we somehow halt this or slow it down? Would we want to?
I think there's
where I'm going to come in and mention the Terminator.
I think
Which
there's
I've
an
never
interesting
watched.
parallel. Okay, so to me, it's about ultimately efficiency, right? Does it do what it needs to do? And there's a number of parallels to be made there. So one is very straightforward in terms of representation, right? We know there's research that Joy Buolamwini has done a couple of years ago around the accuracy of facial recognition software, and she's done this analysis along intersectional axes. And I think, but I'd need to look up, but I think the goal of the facial recognition was just to recognize whether there was a face, and the results are abysmal, right? So for white male faces, accuracy is like 99%. For white non-male faces, it's 93%. For non-white male faces, it's somewhere in the 80s. And for non-white non-male faces, it is somewhere in the 70s. With the darkest skin tones, it's down to 56%. And so that's software that's used to recognize pedestrians in self-driving vehicles, right? So from a very basic sort of approach, it is also just, does it actually do what it needs to do? If the goal is not to hit pedestrians, then the answer is no, right? Because it just simply doesn't recognize all pedestrians. From a pure optimization point of view, that's where if you let all social need, if you disregard all social need, fairness, equity, and all of that, it's simply we're talking about faulty systems. because while the data set that facial recognition software might have been trained on was likely predominantly white and predominantly male, the actual real world of pedestrians doesn't look that way. So you've trained a model that just doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And there's parallels to that. Even so, going beyond the point of fairness, equity, and representation, it just doesn't work the way it's supposed to do. That's one. The other is, take, for example, the way in which we now capture knowledge, right? So a lot of it is verbal, a lot of it is English, and even at a more sort of conceptual level, it is captured in a very specific way. And so this limits the types of knowledge, say, that we can capture, right? If you think just about being able to further, let's say, all of human knowledge, then that's still quite restrained in how we do this. There was a really interesting article in the MIT Tech Review, I think from last month or earlier this year, about a library of graphics they do in the New York Public Library for blind and less sighted people that are sort of like they're 3D, they're tangible graphics. And it's a completely different approach to representing knowledge, right? And so in that way, we will be able to capture more and do more and understand more if we actually approach, sort of challenge the fairly biased ways in which we capture knowledge, which is written predominantly in English and predominantly verbal. Same as cultures that are less verbal and more image-based or other senses-based. There's knowledge there that we're not capturing purely by the restraint of the way in which we capture knowledge. And to sort of finalize that point, even think about oral tradition, right? Where a lot of knowledge is transmitted, not what we're used to, not what we're sort of the way we're used to things being written down and in one single way. Oral tradition, knowledge transfer is through iteration, through variation, and it's never the same. And actually part of it stops sort of living of that knowledge, this is living knowledge, the second that you write it down. And so there are all these constraints in which we don't even really think about very often, the sort of limits of the way in which we're used to doing things. But our technology, specifically our knowledge capturing technology and our digitization, is in that way very much constrained. So it might be able to do some of the things that we're currently wanting to do with it, but that does exclude many other ways that we could be doing things. So in that sense, I think there is a case to be made for continuing to develop those knowledge capturing systems, if you will, or that our AIs are trained on, right? To include those other ways of thinking and other representations of other things that currently aren't represented in many data sets as well.
So a real need to make sure, coming back to Becky, I think for me, it's saying what you said, it really is a need for it to keep growing. I mean, and to just do, because I know Lizzie likes films here, in 1982, there was a film called Blade Runner, which was a very old film. And even then, 40 years ago, I just realised that was 40 years ago, yeah, and I kind of know that film. So
I'm going to come in here and brag that I wasn't even alive.
I was, okay. Anyway, but that film, like 40 years ago, I know it's sci-fi, but it showed that computers couldn't recognize all humans. Yeah, for the different characteristics that every human being has. Yeah. So 40 years later, when we have this technology and it is built by humans, we still haven't grown enough to know that we need to advance and address those flaws that we knew 40 years ago. That's all. So it's in a sense, for me, we need to just keep evolving and growing. The same as we wouldn't say to any human being, like, you're the done thing. You're sorted, you're kind of qualified now, you don't have to progress anymore. We would say, what's your learning for this year? So it's exactly the same with the AI. What are our requirements for it to learn this year to be more efficient and effective at what we all want it to do?
Right, Alison, I think we're going to move on now. You mentioned you wanted to talk about Sam Altman, so the floor is yours.
Well, I'm just interested. I'm doing a Twitter space this week on WorldCoin. Yeah, so Sam Altman, who is both many things, but the job he does is the CEO of OpenAI. So he does that. So on the one part of the scale, he is building AI and making that. And then on the other scale, he's saying, oh, well, because of AI, we are going to eliminate roles, and therefore we need to introduce this universal basic income for everybody. But to give everyone this universal basic income, I need you to come visit one of my orbs, and I'm going to scan your retina, because then I know it's you and you haven't been created by an AI. And therefore, when we get to that position that we're going to be giving every human being, 7.5 billion people, a universal basic income, I know which 7.5 billion people to pay it. And the whole thing has been created. And if you look at, there's so many YouTubes about it and all of that. I haven't yet seen one woman. I haven't yet seen one person of color on any of that creation. What I've seen is 3 white men who have created, have co-founded and bought to investors and brought investors in to develop this idea. And the place they took it to first to capture the first nearly 2 million, they've got 2.6 million retina scanned, and nearly 2 million of those have come from the developed world. And I'm just like interested in, like, what does the world see of this? Think about it, and how's that playing out? Or is no one else even hearing about that? Or
so, Alison, did you queue up in London to get your coin?
No. I am going tomorrow to look at the orb in Shoreditch, and only because to be honest, I was going to. I was in the I'm going to do this camp, until more recently, and I've switched, So I have downloaded the wallet or the app so that then I could schedule an appointment. Interestingly, you can only schedule them a day or 2 days in advance, and I was going to, and then I've been doing more and more watching of it, and now I'm in that. I'm not going there yet. Yeah, maybe this is something that I will in the future, but that's me now. And I'm just interested. So has anyone here done it?
No. I read about it, but I didn't do it. I'm still not comfortable with retina scanning technology, to be honest with you, for access to my money. Because I think at some point someone's going to come and cut my eyeball out and use it to get my money in the future.
It will probably be easy at that point to make a 3D print of your eyeball.
You've been watching too many.
But if films have taught me anything, it's that someone will come and cut my eyeballs out and use them. Exactly. So it's a no from me.
Yeah. And we know sci-fi becomes reality at some point. So yeah, I'm not going there. It worries me using fingertip recognition, Alison, to be honest with you.
That's
going to chop your finger off.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So okay, I mean, I think it is I think we need to be like talking about it. Well, in a sense, we need to be, but I don't actually want to give it that much airtime. But it is a really big phenomenon that is coming, and it's how are people across the world. And I mean, we were having a debate about it, about why are they going to the developed world to get all of these retina scanned? And obviously it's like because they're paying to do that. But actually, once they've got 2 million or they've got 5 million or they've got 10 million, there'll be a change in people's perspective of, well, there's 10 million on this, so I need to jump on this. And so it's about what they're doing. And actually, these are the group of people who are sitting creating this new technology that we're all going to be utilizing. And again, I come back to the point, it's all men. And I'm just really surprised at that in that small circle. Yeah.
And this is going to be a bit controversial, I suspect. So, Lizzie may edit it out, but I listened to, I listened to a podcast with Sam Altman on it. And he was they posed the question to him around kind of, threats to humanity around AI. And he acknowledges, there's, a chance, we don't know. So fine. And the comment he came out with, paraphrasing him badly, was, I don't think there's any human being on the planet who would want to destroy the human race by using AI. And because I'm old and I'm allowed to think things like this now, I thought, oh, naive. He needs the naive badge. That's what people used to say back in the day. Give Mark the naive badge when I was young. And because actually, I'm with him. I don't think there's anybody who would want to use technology to wipe out the human race, but they would probably want to use technology to further their own financial claims. And then you move into the unintended consequences. So my biggest fear with all this, I guess, is unintended consequences. And I think it's a guy, Scott Russell, who came out with an example, which is if you buy a plot of land to build a house on, as part of the house building exercise, you probably inadvertently kill thousands and thousands of insects. You don't go out with the intention of killing the insects; it just happens, and you're not even doing it with malice. And that was the analogy he gave about what AI and AGI, if it does develop, could happen in the future. It could all just be unintended consequences, which we have no idea are going to happen.
This is what messes me up. If we're going into controversy land. Is because this goes into the paperclip example and alignment issues and all of that. And the paperclip example is this thought experiment that Nick Bostrom developed where he's like, okay, what if we have a very capable AI and we instruct it, we give it an objective of, I will botch this, but objective of creating as many paperclips as possible, and it's a smart AI, so it starts thinking of ways to ensure that there's as many paperclips as possible. And so then it starts thinking about, well, if the humans are able to turn me off, I would make less paperclips, so I should ensure that I can never be turned off. And also those humans do use up a lot of resources, and those resources I could use to make more paperclips. So I'm now going to actively compete with these humans, and I'm going to try to get them to not be able to get to their resources so that I can make more paperclips with the resources we're competing for. And then it starts thinking, well, actually, humans are made of all these nice resources themselves, so I'm going to make paperclips out of the skin and bones from all these humans. And that's sort of like the worst of the worst is this. And then you've got these, at the end of the thought experiment, you're meant to walk away with this notion of like, oh my God, can you imagine human beings used as resources? And it's just striking to me that thought seems so novel. But the people who come up with this are always the people that they are men often, they are white often, they are affluent often. And so, yeah, I can see that being sort of like a jarring reality to come home to. There is the majority of the people on this planet are already being used for resources. And I get a little miffed when there's suddenly an interest in wanting to address this problem in the future for when AI gets to a point where we somehow then it's a problem to use human beings as resources. Let me be clear, I find it a problem to use human beings as resources, right? When I think about the way in which we extract labor and value and resources out of countries for Western countries to sort of live this extravagant life while other people perish, I find that problematic. But that is a problem that exists today. And so with all the energy and all the attention that's being given by people who have suddenly only now woken up to this as a potential problem, or find this a potential problem, that an AI would do this to human beings, it rings to me a bit like it's only becoming a problem because they're seeing that they might be the ones who are being used for resources. When if you have that much energy around this problem, have at it. Go at it today, because that's a today problem. You can start working towards solving that today, and you don't need some future sci-fi scenario in order to say, you know what, this is a big enough problem for us to address, because that problem exists and can use that kind of energy very much today. That's where I sit on that controversy.
I love that point, Alix. And I think, we started off thinking this was going to be about AI, but actually where you've just shifted it to is around ESG. So, environment and social governance. And, this is stuff we should be tackling as business owners today. We should be looking at our social, not just environmental, but the social and governance aspects. and social tends to get overlooked in my experience. People are very much focused on the E of that, and the G is quite easy if you run your own business, but the S is the less palatable bit to look at sometimes with your supply chains, etc. So you're right. Maybe we should all, as business owners, be focusing much more on the S, the social part of it today, as part of ESG, rather than worrying about AI tomorrow, because tomorrow could be a long way off, but we've got a lot of issues on the planet as it is today without worrying about AI tomorrow. So I think we've shifted subtly into ESG, but I think it's a really it's a great point. And I think we can all get carried away with this tech stuff because we're worried that it's going to wipe us out in 20 years' time. 20 years is a long while, especially while to use inflammatory language, while the earth burns. We maybe should be doing stuff today which we can control today, and let other people worry about that bit. Let Sam Altman worry about that. I can't do much about that, but I can actually do something within Larkin Gowan about ESG today.
Well, so can Sam Altman. He can do a lot today as well. Why not have someone of that prowess tackle today's problem instead of one that might come to happen in the future?
Yeah.
I mean, yes, to you as well, and every business owner, there is a lot we can do. And I get disheartened by the level of activation that we can apparently sort of muster for a future problem when that very problem exists today. And there's just so much we can be doing about that today, especially as business owners, especially as leaders. So if that is a problem that activates us in that way, then I would invite anyone who has listened to some sort of future Megadeth event and thought like, oh, we should really be doing something about that, as an invitation to do something about that today.
That is a really sobering, challenging point you raise there, and I think it's for our listeners now who think maybe we've strayed off business, I think we're firmly back into business there. So great point. And actually, Megadeth, I've got stories. That's another one of my favorite bands, but we won't go there.
Have you had a generative AI make you a Megadeth song yet?
I haven't, but I've actually met Megadeth and had a backstage pass and met them and shaken hands with the lineup as it was at the time and got photos with them. But hey, that's just kind of I'm just going into fan zone now.
No time for a Curtis tale. Let's move on.
So Alison,
the bit that I still struggle with, rather than the bit I struggle with, other than Mark's music taste, we talk about AI like it's this thing that we can't have any say in how it evolves and develops, and we talk about it like the threat of AI. And to my simple brain, it's a bit like, this is going to be controversial to some people, I don't understand why we do space travel. I'm like, why? I don't get it. It costs a lot of money. I get that we need to be curious. I get we need to ask questions, but there's a lot better things we could be spending money on as far as I'm concerned. Why can't we make decisions about how we develop this technology, as opposed to some people seem to talk about it as if it is going to control us? And that's the bit I don't get. And I don't want to get it because I don't want to look that far ahead because I know it's all scary and horrible. But I still, in my simplistic view, I'm like, let's just stop investing in it then, in the bits that we don't want to happen.
But even if we did think that, and some people might be absolutely in your corner there, Becky, of like, let's stop now. And you hear that a lot. Let's stop. Yeah, let's suppress it and hold it all down. But actually, as human beings, we're curious and we are going to keep evolving it. Yeah. So we have to just acknowledge that as well. Yeah. But I think it's the bit about every human being, regardless of where you are in the kind of building of it, usage of it, it is your moral responsibility to be shaping it. Yeah. But then if you are a leader in AI, then you absolutely have a moral responsibility to say who is around this table, who is growing it, who is developing it. And yes, we just talked about WorldCoin, and that is a popular one at the moment, but it's real, and it's saying that the people around the table do not represent society. And whilst that continues, there will continue to have a detrimental impact then on what is built. And therefore, it's every single individuals, as Mark, you said before, every leader, like as a leader, you're responsible for thinking who's around the table, who am I listening to, who is in my kind of circle, yeah, and how am I getting fed information? What is the lens I'm seeing the world through? And if everyone that is doing that looks like you, and I'm afraid the WorldCoin team do look all the same, then actually you have an absolute responsibility to reach out and to make sure it's different. And I think that that's what every company, every business is doing, and all we can do is keep encouraging them to do more of that, and to look at how when they develop components of the AI, they're doing the same. They're making sure that the lens in which they're building it through is as diverse as possible, because then we have a greater opportunity that we will eliminate some of those inherent biases that are being and have been built into the systems already.
It is such a crucial, and it sounds so simple, and it's been, but like who sits at the table matters so much. And I think we talked last time about one of the workshops we run, that where we have people sort of build their own AI, right? And we give 4 different groups the same assignment, the same data, the same goal, and the only thing that's different is the people who sit at the table, and outcomes different algorithms. That's how much it matters. And that's for everything, right? That's just an automation, but that's for anything. And I now have like more than 500 people. Like, I have all the data. Not one time is the outcome the same just because the composition at the table is different. It is that simple. That's the effect that having people at the table has, is it changes the outcomes. It changes how these systems work. It changes what decisions are being made and why, and that makes for different outcomes. And it's sometimes I feel like people want some sort of like tech solution to these kinds of problems, but it is a people solution. It is as simple as taking responsibility, making sure that there's a representative sort of decision making power, and that's what gets you to the right outcomes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I heard a guy on a podcast who was talking about intelligence, and he said he defined intelligence as something along the lines of having a goal and being able to adapt and have adaptive strategies to get to meet that goal. So he said that's broadly what intelligence is. But he said the important thing with intelligence is the application of wisdom, because without the application of wisdom, pure intelligence is very little use, and it's potentially more dangerous. And I think listening to what you were both saying there, what we're really talking about is humans using their wisdom, isn't it? So is it wise to sit there and look around a table and you're effectively looking in a mirror because everyone looks the same? That doesn't seem very wise. So we need to apply, these people are very intelligent. They're probably 5 times as intelligent as I am, but are they as wise? Okay, probably they are. Bad example I'm using myself. If it was Becky, they're not as wise as Becky, so it's like we need to bring this wisdom piece in, and I thought that was such a nice way that it was put, and I just think let's apply wisdom and be wise about some of this stuff, not just use intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for not linearly defining intelligence. Actually, there's something like intelligence in and of itself is so many different things, right? It's not a straight line. It's not like 0 to 100 and you sit there and I sit here or wherever. It's really just a diversity of thinking, like ways of thinking is in and of itself as important. And so whether we call that intelligence or wisdom, it just means that there needs to be different approaches, different modes of operation that all get to have a say.
Yeah, and that is so important that sometimes I think I'm going to say intellectualize it too much, and therefore people think only certain people can do it. Actually, the most important thing is who is in your network. Look around, and if your network is you or the same as you, then look again and go and find it, because it's not our fault. Sometimes if we've grown up in an area, that is all impacting. That comes back to the bit that what Becky said about personal responsibility, that it doesn't matter who you are, at what level. Every person is a leader, and they're a leader of themselves, and they're leaders of those who are surrounding them. And we all have a responsibility to say, who do I talk to? Who do I take my kind of thoughts from? And how am I making sure that they're not just reflective of myself and my own value base? Because we will build a better world the more that we have encompassed all of those differences. Yes, we have more similarities than we think, but our differences does make for a unique result.
Yeah, thank you. Conscious of both of your time, you've been very generous, and we've covered quite a lot. I'm sure we could do parts 2 and 3 to this because there's so much we could do. But just bring this episode to a close. Just like to give each of you an opportunity to maybe leave the listeners and viewers with just one thing that you would like to leave with them, a thought, a comment, an idea, something for them to consider.
Yeah, I think I was going to say my answer is like it's about the openness, being open, yeah, and looking at everything, and inviting everyone in to help you grow your own knowledge. I just think we can't underestimate learning and growing.
Yeah, I think for me it would be, and I think I said the exact same thing last time, maybe, if is for us to be very mindful, for all of us. And I think this is an important sort of mindset with which in business, as people, we need to approach these kinds of technologies, is to never forget that they were built by humans and that they're at their core very human, and to treat them as such. I think the biggest mistake we could make is consider our technology neutral or objective. And the biggest advances we can make with our technology is to treat them as neither.
Very, very wise words from both of you. Thank you.
What would your words be, Mark?
Yeah.
What would your thoughts be?
Well, it's going to kill us all. No, I don't know. I mean, I suppose I worry about it because I think I've just heard way too much about AGI, and then how do you know when you got AGI? Well, you're not going to know because it's not going to tell you it's AGI, and then it's going to come and use us as carbon. I mean, that's the sci-fi worry. I think the bigger worry for me is probably how do we, I think, as you said, Alex, we've got a very divided planet. We've got 3 billion people living in like kings and queens of old. The wealth and the lifestyles we have are just like nothing which has been seen in the history of the planet or the human species, while we've got 4 billion people living in abject poverty with very little. So it's very easy to sit here in England in a comfortable position thinking, oh, what about when jobs start to go and all that sort of stuff? But actually we've got bigger issues around the globe than that. It's like, we look at it in a very insular thing, as you were saying, Alex. So for me, it's how can we use the tech to, I don't want to sound like this is going to sound like a contestant on Miss World from the 1980s. I want world peace. How do we build a better world? I genuinely think we should look at, if we're going to use this tech, how do we genuinely make it a better world? And, let's stop having, world leaders and geopolitical issues over materials and water and stuff. Let's actually just work together as a global community. I know it's not going to happen because humans have never shown any way of doing that in our past, but that I'd just like us to use the tech to move towards a better world for not just human beings, but all species on the planet, without getting too eco about the whole thing. I just think we should really reset the bound. I know this is about leadership, but leadership is a whole wide, diverse topic, as we've said before. It's not just about business. It's about leadership of life as well. I would really like us to just get the focus on how do we use the tech to make the planetary experience for humans and other animals and all wildlife just better, whatever that might mean. So, sorry, bit of a rambling answer there, but that's where I sit with tech, I think, really.
What about you, Becky?
I think my message would be, don't just let this happen to you, and take responsibility. Don't absolve yourself of responsibility and say there's nothing I can do to influence this, or control is not the right word, but to harness the benefits, but don't just accept that it's going to happen regardless. that still humans do have that ability. Yeah. As we've said, humans in the loop, we can control this, and we should. And I think that's the bit where it feels a bit like too many people are going, oh, it's just going to happen, there's nothing we can do. And I'm like, I don't subscribe to that.
Okay.
And don't worry.
I think that's a really brilliant article, Becky. How do we take lead, use and shape AI? Yeah, I think that's a really great one. It's like how every individual is leading, shaping and using AI.
Got a title for the episode there. Thank you, Alison.
Someone said, I heard someone the other day, they said we shouldn't worry about much at all, really, because when you think about it, we're sitting on a lump of rock which is traveling at 67,000 miles an hour while spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. There's not a lot else to worry about, really, is there?
Why would you worry about that?
It's pretty scary, isn't it? If you had to go on a fairground ride that was doing that, you'd be thinking, I'm going to be seeing my breakfast or something, wouldn't you? But, it'd be pretty scary.
Yeah, but the odds are that bit of things is okay. There is a lot of other stuff to concern ourselves about.
So I'm going to challenge you. Is this based on your astrophysics degree?
Yes.
Yeah. So
the one that says we shouldn't invest in space travel.
But we don't worry about that, do we? We don't worry about we're hurtling through space on this lump of rock. We don't worry about that at all. But so what else is there to worry about? That's pretty scary. I think when I think about that, I find it quite scary. But I'm not going to think about it.
That's gone well so far.
That's what I mean. Yeah. And also, if you can't do anything about it, what's the point worrying about it?
Well, it kind of.
We've all got to focus on the melting ice caps. Let's face it.
Yeah.
We're all talking about all this other stuff, but really, it's the ice caps.
It's only gone well for the last kind of 50 million years, hasn't it? Up until then, the previous 4 billion were pretty hairy.
Fair enough, yeah, but still, some things survived throughout that too. We wouldn't, but other things.
Yeah,
would.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up.
We've gone off on a tangent.
There we go.
Thank you to both of you. It's been really interesting just knocking it around and hearing your expert views around this topic and our layperson's views from stuff we've read and listened to. It's been really fascinating. And I think the listeners are going to kind of have some food for thought off the back of this. I suspect most people don't invest a great deal of time looking into it, which is fair enough. We just deal with the outputs rather than everything else. So if there's one thing that people are going to think or do differently off the back of this, then it's been really worthwhile.
That's wonderful. Appreciate that sentiment.
So Alix and Alison, you've both been on the show before, so if people have listened to those episodes, I'm sure they know how to reach you. But for new listeners, where's the best place for people to get in touch with you if they want to find out a little bit more about you and what you do?
I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me there. Just make sure you mention how you know me, where you heard me, so I know where you come from.
Same here. I'm LinkedIn. Alison Alexander will get me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, anything possible, or visit my Substack, A Metaverse A, and then you will be able to just see all the different things I've written. Yep.
That's great, thank you. And we'll put links in the show notes so people can reach out to you if they want to find out more. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you both.
Thank you.
So as we've said, the links are all in the show notes. If you've enjoyed today's show, then please rate and review us. It really helps other people find this podcast so we can spread the word even further. And finally, a massive thank you to our sponsors, Larkin Gowan. Without Larkin Gowan, this show would not be possible. So please follow the link to see how their team of experts can help you and your business. And Becky, that just leaves us to say, everyone have a great week, take care of yourself and boost your health, wealth and self.